Welcome back to Sideplaned, everybody. You know how we love to unpack complex science topics here, and today we're diving deep into something that might seem simple on the surface, but trust me, it's anything but.
Oh,
We're
absolutely.
talking about biological sex.
Oh,
We've
okay.
got this really interesting article called The Complexities of Biological Sex Beyond Binary Definitions.
Hmm.
And getting into it, it really does kind of blow your mind
Yeah.
because we always think, male, female, that's it,
Uh,
right?
Yeah, it seems straightforward, right? Like it's just one or the other.
Right.
It's way more complicated than that.
Exactly. It turns out it's way more complicated than that.
It is, and this article actually starts out with a really striking statement. It says, "Sex is messy."
I love that. Sex is messy. You don't often hear that in a, biology textbook.
Right.
So why is it so messy? What makes it so much more than just this simple binary?
Well, we tend to oversimplify things as humans, and, sex is no exception. We think male, female. But the article goes into how it's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of factors that play together.
Okay.
You've got genes, you've got hormones, you've got all the developmental processes that happen in the womb, and even, environmental factors. It's kind of like if you just looked at somebody's height and you said, okay, that's all I need to know about this person.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're saying it's kind of like a spectrum almost.
Exactly.
We've got people who are taller than average or shorter than average. It doesn't define them as a person.
Right. It's just one data point. It's just one characteristic. So think of biological sex in a similar way. Like there's a range.
Okay, I like that. So we're ditching the binary and thinking more broadly.
Exactly.
Now, the article brings up something that the Trump administration did. They tried to define sex by gamete size only,
Yeah, that was a whole thing.
which basically means just looking at sperm versus egg.
Sperm versus egg.
But then the article throws out this question: what about people who don't produce any gametes at all?
Right, because that definition leaves out a lot of people. And the article uses a really great example, Turner syndrome. So this affects about 1 in every 2,000 to 2,500 females. And these individuals actually have a uterus.
Okay.
But instead of having ovaries, they have something called streak gonads. And so they don't actually produce any eggs.
So where do they fit in?
Exactly. Where do they fit in if you're only defining sex based on gametes?
Right. And then what about, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, people going through medical treatments
Yeah.
that affect their ability to produce gametes, or
Yeah.
people who've gone through menopause. Does that make them somehow less male or female? I don't think so.
Of course not.
Yeah.
But you can see how a definition like that would kind of suggest otherwise. And that's why this article is saying, clinging to one very specific definition like that
Yeah.
is
Well,
going to cause problems.
it's going to cause problems.
It's going to create confusion. It's going to exclude people. It's important to just acknowledge from the start that this is a more nuanced thing than we might think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so we're thinking about it in a more nuanced way.
Yeah.
Now, I always kind of assumed, and I think a lot of people do, that sex is determined right at the moment of conception.
Right. You get your X and your Y chromosome and boom, that's it.
That's it. That's what I always thought. But
Yeah, a lot of people think that. But the reality is it's not nearly that straightforward.
Right.
It's not just like this one and done thing. Sex development is actually this fascinating process that unfolds over time, and it starts way later than you might think.
So when does it actually begin?
Okay, so picture this. Around 6 weeks after conception, you have these cells that emerge, and these cells are going to eventually form the gonads. The gonads are those organs that produce the gametes.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. At this early stage, male and female, these precursor cells, they look exactly the same.
Oh, wow.
You can't tell the difference.
So then how do they end up developing differently?
Well, about 2 weeks later, around week 8, things start to change. In males, the developing tests, they start to produce testosterone.
Okay.
And testosterone, this hormone, it's really important for the development of the external male genitalia.
So that's when we start to see those physical differences we usually think of.
Right. But even then, it's not just like, okay, testosterone's here, we're done. It gets a little weird
Hey.
because around week 20, testosterone production drops off significantly. It's almost like the body's taking a break.
It's like a little pause.
Yeah, a little pause.
Okay.
And then, of course, at puberty, testosterone ticks back in again for sperm maturation.
Oh, wow. It's like this whole hormonal roller coaster happening in the womb.
It is.
So what's going on with females during this time?
So in females, the ovaries, they don't actually produce sex hormones during fetal development. And here's another thing that might surprise you. The uterus, the fallopian tubes, and the vagina all develop without any hormonal influence at all.
Wait, so they just develop on their own? No hormonal signals required.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's like they got their own blueprint.
Yeah. It really
Uh,
challenges the idea that, hormones are the only things driving sex development. And speaking of drivers, got to talk about chromosomes. We call them sex chromosomes, but they're doing a lot more than just determining sex.
Okay, let's talk about the X and the Y. I have a feeling it's more complicated than just XX equals female, XY equals male, right?
You are absolutely right. And we have these variations that kind of mess with that whole simple binary.
Okay.
So, Turner syndrome that we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
those females only have one X chromosome.
Right. And they have a uterus but no egg production.
Exactly. And then you have Klinefelter syndrome, where males have an extra X chromosome.
Okay.
So it's XXY, and these guys often don't produce sperm.
So even at the genetic level, it's way more complex than we usually think.
It is. It is. It's not just the chromosome itself, it's how those genes are being expressed. The article talks about this gene called SRY that's crucial for male development. It's on the Y chromosome, and this gene, it basically acts like a master switch that kicks off the formation of the testes and the production of testosterone.
Okay, and so what happens? The article mentions that this gene can actually jump from the Y chromosome sometimes during sperm production. That's kind of crazy to me.
I know, it's wild. So during sperm production, that SRY gene, it can actually detach from the Y chromosome and reattach to a different chromosome.
So like the X chromosome.
Yeah, potentially.
So what happens if an embryo has two X chromosomes, but they get that SRY gene that jumped over?
Well, they might develop as male, even though they have those XX chromosomes.
That completely changes how I think about the link between genes and sex.
It is. It is. It's not just which chromosomes you inherit, it's what those genes are actually doing.
Wow, so it's not a static blueprint, it's dynamic.
Absolutely. And to add another layer of complexity, it's not just the genes themselves, but also how the body responds to those hormones that they're producing.
So even if someone has, like, the genes for male development, their body might not actually react to the hormones in the way we'd expect.
Yeah, that's right. And a classic example of that is androgen insensitivity syndrome. So these individuals, they've got XY chromosomes, they have the SRY gene, their tests are producing testosterone, but their bodies aren't responding to androgens.
And androgens are.
Androgens are a group of hormones, and they include testosterone, and they play a key role in male development.
So even though they have the genes for male development, their body takes a different path because it's not responding to the signals.
Yeah, it's really incredible how many different factors can be at play here. It all comes back to that idea. Sex is messy.
Sex is messy. It's a good way to put it.
There's no one thing that defines it. It's this whole intricate interplay of genes, hormones, and all these developmental processes.
And sometimes those factors can be giving conflicting signals.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really is mind-boggling when you start thinking about all the different variations that are out there. And how it just totally like throws out this idea that we have in our heads about, what's normal.
It challenges all of our assumptions, for sure.
And it brings us to this really important concept that the article talks about intersex.
Right.
Now, I think that's a term that a lot of people might not be familiar with, or they might have some, misconceptions about what it actually means.
Yeah, definitely.
So can you kind of break it down for us? What exactly does intersex mean?
So intersex basically refers to anyone whose biological characteristics don't fit neatly into those typical male or female categories.
So they don't fit that binary that we always talk about.
Right, exactly. They might have variations in their chromosomes, their hormones, or their anatomy. And the article really emphasizes that this is not some rare thing. This is actually much more common than people might think.
How common are we talking?
So they say about 1.7% of the population is intersex, which is roughly the same as the number of people with red hair.
Wow. So it's not insignificant at all.
It's not insignificant. And that really makes you think, why are we still so fixated on this binary when variations are clearly so common?
Yeah.
Why do we still have this outdated view when the reality is so different?
Yeah, I think there are a few reasons. I mean, there's definitely a lack of awareness and education about intersex conditions.
Okay.
There's also this very strong societal pressure to conform to those traditional male and female categories.
Right.
From the moment we're born, we're kind of slotted into one or the other.
Right. Pink or blue, right from the start.
Exactly. And unfortunately, this lack of understanding, it can have some really harmful consequences for intersex individuals.
The article talks about how intersex people have been subjected to unnecessary surgeries and hormone treatments,
Yeah.
often without their consent, in an attempt to make their bodies conform to those societal expectations.
Right. It's a really dark part of history, and it's something that we're still grappling with today. These interventions, they were often performed on infants and children.
Who couldn't advocate for themselves. And they were based on this idea that there was only one right way to be male or female.
Right, like we're trying to force people into these categories that they don't naturally fit into.
Exactly. And it's so heartbreaking to think about how many people have been affected by this and how much suffering they've had to endure because of this rigid binary thinking.
It really makes you question, the ethics of it all.
Definitely.
And the article also mentions something else, which is denial of healthcare access.
Yes.
Based on these inaccurate classifications of sex.
Right. If someone's biological sex doesn't fit neatly into a checkbox on a form, it can create all sorts of problems for them in terms of getting the care they need.
And then beyond just the healthcare aspect, there's the emotional toll, right?
Absolutely. I mean, imagine feeling like you don't belong anywhere, like you're somehow not normal because your body doesn't fit these predetermined categories.
Yeah.
It can lead to so much confusion, isolation, and even shame.
And it really highlights the need for us to shift our thinking, to be more inclusive.
Absolutely.
So given all of this, what can we actually do to start challenging these harmful norms and creating a more accurate and compassionate understanding of sex and gender?
Well, I think education is a really big part of it. We need to start having open and honest conversations about the complexities of biological sex and gender from a young age, not just, waiting till college or adulthood.
I think it's got to start early.
It needs to be part of our basic understanding of science and human development.
So we're not just perpetuating these myths and these stereotypes.
Exactly. We also need to be listening to the voices and experiences of intersex individuals themselves. Let them guide us in understanding what it means to live outside of those binary norms.
Yeah, and advocate for their rights and well-being.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that there isn't just one right way to be male or female. There's a whole spectrum of human variation, and we need to celebrate that, not try to erase it.
Right, and it makes me think back to that statement in the article. Choosing any single definer of sex is bound to sow confusion. We've been trying to force everyone into these narrow little boxes for way too long.
Yeah, it's like trying to define a whole person by just their height or their hair color. It just doesn't capture the full picture.
Exactly. So how do we start unpacking this idea of biological sex in a way that's more accurate, more inclusive, and ultimately more respectful of the incredible diversity of human experience?
Yeah.
It really is amazing to think about how much this challenges what we consider normal.
Yeah, nature doesn't always play by our rules, right?
It doesn't.
Biological sex, it's like so many other things in biology. It's incredibly diverse.
Mm-hmm.
It exists on a spectrum, and trying to force it into this binary, it just doesn't reflect the reality.
And it has real-world consequences when we try to cling to that binary view.
Oh, absolutely.
And we talked about the medical interventions that some intersex people have gone through. But it goes even beyond that. It affects things like gender identity, legal rights, access to health care. All these things are tied to how we define and understand sex.
It really does. When we have this limited understanding of sex, we end up creating these systems and policies that actually exclude people whose bodies and experiences don't fit into those narrow norms.
And it's important to remember that biological sex, it's just one piece of a person's identity.
Right. It doesn't define who they are as a person.
It doesn't determine their gender identity or how they should be treated.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? How do we start moving toward a more inclusive and accurate understanding of sex?
I think education is key.
Yeah.
We got to start having these conversations early on about the complexities of biological sex. We need to challenge the misinformation and the stigma that's out there about intersex variations. And we need to create spaces where people feel safe to share their experiences and their identities without feeling judged or discriminated against.
Yeah, it's about shifting our whole mindset.
Yeah.
Not about trying to force people into boxes, but really appreciating the diversity that's out there.
That's it. That's it.
It's been an amazing deep dive. It's definitely challenged my own assumptions, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
Yeah, it's a journey of learning and unlearning.
It is.
The more we learn about the science of sex, the more we realize our old ideas, those simple notions, they just don't work anymore.
Right.
And that understanding can be so freeing for people, for individuals, and for society.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep challenging those outdated binary ideas about sex.
Yes.
Science is all about embracing complexity and the human body. That's the perfect example of complexity in all its forms.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
Yeah.
There are so many resources out there, so many communities that are dedicated to promoting understanding and acceptance of the full spectrum of human variation.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you. To all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of biological sex. We'll catch you next time on Cyplaned.